When I was 6 years old, my mother's boyfriend murdered her and my little sister right in front of me. He hit us and cursed us a lot over the 2 months that we knew him. At first he was nice, but his abuse slowly escalated to the point when we all were in constant fear. One night, my sister and I were watching Power Rangers in the den. At least, my sister was watching it. I was mostly listening as I played with a set of Power Rangers cards in front of me on the floor. The TV was loud. I turned it up to help drown out the noise of them fighting in the bedroom, an increasingly common and very disturbing situation. Our cat had gone missing, and my mother suspected her boyfriend had something to do with it. I think she had planned to break up with him finally. So, as me and my sis were in the den, suddenly our mom threw open her bedroom door and came running down the hall towards us, screaming and crying. She frantically opened a drawer in the small kitchen next to the den and began fumbling among the utensils. She was sobbing, and as she stood there, I noticed blood on the side of her face. I jerked my head back towards the hall, expecting to see him chasing after her. But he didn't come out of the room. It was as if he was looking for something and having trouble finding it. The dark hallway remained empty, interrupted only by the dim swath of light spilling out from their open bedroom door. On hearing Mom's frightened voice, I turned back to look at her, still focused on the drawer as she searched. She spoke haltingly.
I need you to take your sister, baby, and go now.
I hadn't noticed my little sister get up and walk down the hall. I heard her little girl's voice scolding into the open bedroom doorway. A gunshot shook the house almost simultaneous with the collapse of her small body. Mom screamed a chilling scream and sprinted towards her down the hall. She fell to her knees as she began to pick up my sister's body, and then the second shot rang out. It all happened so fast, I couldn't yell or move or utter a word. I just couldn't believe it. I seemed to black out as the world swirled around me. The bodies of my mother and baby sister lay there in the hallway, with the darkness of their spilled blood spreading around them on the carpet. Neither of them made a sound after being shot. The light went out in the bedroom, and I gasped. The hallway was now dark as pitch. To this day, I'm ashamed I didn't check on them. I didn't do anything to help them. I was so terrified. I was still in shock. There hadn't been a day that had gone by that I haven't been racked with the what-ifs. A burst of adrenaline surged through me from God knows where, and with my hands shaking like leaves, I managed to run out the front door and down the street. I didn't stop at the neighbor's house. I just continued to run, farther and farther away. I don't remember when I began to cry, but it was sometime before I reached the end of the block, when I ran right into this big middle-aged lady. To this day, her concerned first words to me still echo in my ears.
Oh my God, what's wrong, sweetie?
I couldn't speak through my tears and awkwardly pointed back towards our house.
Where do you live, sweetheart? Are you hurt?
She called out to her husband to call the police and brought me to their front porch. I vomited on that nice lady's porch, something I still feel guilty about. That kind, sweet lady who did so much for me in that horrible night. My grandmother didn't let me go to the joint funeral since I seemed traumatized enough by that point. And indeed, I was. So traumatized that I wasn't able to communicate beyond gestures again until after my 8th birthday, almost 2 years later. There was constant ache in my chest from the memory of my mom and sister. In all of my dreams, they were still alive, and then I would wake up and reality would hit me all over again. It was a long and slow recovery. Even when the police asked me questions about that night, I had been unable to answer, mute, causing yet another thick layer of guilt to form over my fractured solitude. Years went by as I lived my new life with my grandmother in another state. I loved my grandmother, and we got along wonderfully. Somehow, we were just on the same wavelength. My childhood at home had been miserable. lots of chores and abuse dished out by my mom's string of nasty lovers. At my grandma's, however, I had peace and freedom from these torments, and was slowly able to meet some people my own age, even if none of them ever really became my friends. There was always a part of me that felt wounded and different, which prevented that carefree social chemistry I saw among others. Even though I looked normal, the other kids still sensed me as being different, despite not knowing about my past, and they ostracized me for it. I got the first letter when I was 16. Since my grandma had gotten too frail to go out much, I always checked the mail on my way in from school. Among the bills, there was an envelope with my first name written on it. When I looked inside, I felt my heart stop. It contained a single Power Rangers playing card, just like the ones I was playing with on that horrible night. There was no note or anything else. It felt as though my heart dropped into my stomach, and I had to make a deliberate effort to breathe again. I had never spoken to anyone about that night. Ever. Whenever the subject was broached, I would tell them to stop, or I would just leave the room. The boyfriend had turned the gun on himself after the crime, or so I had overheard later. So, where the hell did this card come from? Although I was afraid, I didn't tell my grandma about it. I convinced myself that a fellow student was playing a prank on me. Someone at school had somehow heard about what happened to me as a child, and thought it'd be cute to send a reminder, some twisted joke to play on the outcast boy. I felt very uneasy for a while, but nothing else came of it. Several months went by. I had practically forgotten about the card. As it's wont to happen with teenagers, I was in a period where I was staying up late and oversleeping. This eventually caused me to miss a class, so I had to stay after school one day for detention. On the way out, I decided to go by my locker and drop off my books. I'd finished my homework, and I didn't want to take some of these heavy books home and back for nothing. The hallway my locker was on was deserted by this time of the afternoon. When I opened it, another envelope fell out. I felt an ominous pounding deep inside my chest when I saw it. Inside the envelope was a sheet of paper that read simply, "You were a smart boy to run away, but I'm getting up from the bed now." I felt an ominous pounding deep inside my chest when I saw it. Inside the envelope was a sheet of paper that read simply, "You were a smart boy to run away, but I'm getting up from the bed now." I froze in fear and quickly looked left and right down the long hallway. No one in sight. I took a deep breath and ran towards the school office, but bumped into our school resource officer along the way. A little relieved, I showed him the note and told him someone had been in my locker. But once again, I couldn't bring myself to talk about the murders. He said he would review the CCTV and let me know what turned up. He asked if I needed him to call anyone for a ride and offered to escort me outside on the sidewalk. On the walk home, I became more convinced it was a cruel prank. But which asshat was doing this to me? When I got home, I put on my headphones with some music and fired up a favorite computer game and tried to forget about it. The next day at school, I looked a bit more suspiciously than usual at everyone, trying to figure out who was doing this to me. Who would do such a thing to a kid who went through such a horrific experience? Although I wasn't popular, not by a long shot, I didn't exactly have any known enemies either. There had been one guy in particular I had good reason to suspect after the first letter. Your typical high school bully type of guy, who had tormented me now and then, and many others too. But he hanged himself a few weeks later. Supposedly, his girlfriend dumped him for another guy not long before that. Not a real tragedy for the human race, per se, but it was a little unnerving, and anyways, it clearly wiped him off the list of suspects once the second letter arrived. A year went by. Another year of ordinary experiences, if lonely ones, at my high school. My grades were above average, but I was bored with school and the people there. Even though I was graduation age, I was still 2 years behind my peers because of my non-communication period. I couldn't wait to get out of that awful school though, so I studied for and then passed my GED. GED in hand, I got a job waiting tables and then started night classes at a local community college. I was able to get some Pell Grant and some other financial aid, which helped a lot. My goal was to eventually transfer to a 4-year institution. One Friday night in October, I finished the PM shift at the restaurant after midnight. I had just clocked out when our assistant manager came back to give me my tips. She had a funny look on her face and said,
"Somebody must have really liked your service tonight."
I asked her what she meant.
"They left you an envelope with your name on it in the tip jar."
I immediately got a little dizzy when she said this. Not again, I thought. Oh, hell no, not again. She handed me my share of the tip money and the envelope. There it was, just like the others, with my first name written on the front in that same dreaded handwriting. I debated whether or not to open it there, or to throw it away, or to take it home first. I reached over and took a swig from my Dr. Pepper, and then ripped open the envelope, my heart racing like a rabbit's. Inside was a single sheet of paper. At first it seemed blank. Then I turned it over and saw the writing. I just stepped over the bodies. I'm in the hallway now, walking. I felt faint and grabbed onto a nearby table so I wouldn't fall. A co-worker was passing by saying goodnight on his way out, and I hoarsely asked him to call the police. I told him I had just received a death threat. As he complied, my mind began racing. Had that bastard lived after all, and not turned the gun on himself in the dark bedroom so many years ago? Had I misheard the adults talking during the tumultuous blizzard of events in the wake of that tragedy? Perhaps he had gone to prison instead and escaped, or been paroled, or was unsupervised released from a mental hospital for the criminally insane. 2 police officers showed up, made a report, and left, but I could tell by their manner that they didn't take it seriously. This time, I had strangely wanted to tell them about that night, but I physically couldn't bring my larynx to eject the words. I mentioned the 2 previous letters, and they said it was likely a prank. They probably would have been annoyed that they were called out for such a trivial matter, if not for the fact that we gave them some free coffee for their troubles. I had a car, albeit an old hoopty, and felt emotionally shaken on the way home. In the shadows, my mind placed every kind of horror. But in the end, there was nothing there. I made it inside the house and into my bed safely, even as my mind continued to review all of these events against my will. Naturally, I was on edge for a couple of weeks, at times bordering on real paranoia, but it's impossible to stay vigilant for an extended period of time. Eventually, you naturally return to the rhythms of routine. The banality of a 21st century existence as a wage slave and student supplanted all of my attention, as did, several months later, my acceptance as a transfer student to a university in a neighboring state. It was hard saying goodbye to my grandma after living with her for so many years, but I was comforted by the fact that she was going to move in with 2 of her dear old friends who lived in a big house in another part of town. I felt better knowing that she would not be living alone, as her ability to care for herself faded. Her little dog, who admittedly was more than a little annoying with his frequent yapping, ran away shortly before I received the first letter, and I was glad that Grandma could now enjoy some companionship with some people besides me. Living in a dorm with 3 strangers took some getting used to. I never had a real friend before, but the 3 guys I was put in with seemed to be laid back and open to being buddies. We got along reasonably well, and they were a good support system for getting adjusted to independent living. I looked forward to my classes each day. They were more difficult than those at community college, but I enjoyed the subjects. I liked the fact that my professors were not leaning over my shoulder all the time, but trusted me to get the work done. A couple months before the summer break, my favorite professor, who I really looked up to, embarrassed me a bit by asking me to stay after class. I couldn't think of any reason why he would do so. Though I liked him a lot, he had no real reason to take any notice of me. The rest of the students filtered out the door, and after they were all gone, the professor looked at me with a concerned expression on his face and asked me to meet with him in his office. His office was upstairs on the other side of the building, and on the way there, he made patronizing small talk to me, yet seemed not to care about my answers. He seemed distracted about something. We finally arrived at his office. He unlocked the door and flipped on the light and asked me to take a seat. I did so. He then got behind his desk and began to look for something. At last, he found it.
"What's this all about?"
He asked grimly as he tossed a white envelope across his desk towards my lap. I caught it in midair, shocked. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as I suddenly realized what it was. There it was again, suddenly and capriciously out of the blue. The blank envelope, like all the times before, with only my scrawled first name gracing its exterior. This time, however, the envelope had been opened, cleanly, with a sharp letter opener. I glanced nervously at the professor, still riding a wave of deep anxiety, and pulled out the sheet of paper that was inside. It read, "I've left the hall and I'm in the den now. Can you see the gun I'm holding? I sure see you running down the sidewalk. Smart boy." My throat caught on something invisible, and I tried to stifle myself from crying. A tear rolled down my cheek and my lips quivered.
"I'm sorry if all of this upset you. Do you want to call for a doctor? I just want to know why you slipped this under my door last night."
"What are you saying?"
"There's no use denying it. I saw you do it with my own eyes yesterday evening."
Overcome with emotion, I began to sob uncontrollably. Tears fell from my face onto the paper, smearing the ink. It was like a 1,000-year-old geyser had finally unleashed its hot torrent, buried deep within the Earth's crust. "Yes! It was me! It was me, you fucking idiot! I shot them all! I had no fucking choice!" The professor's face turned pale, and his expression alternated between confusion and revulsion. My eyes and ears did not register as he picked up the phone and called campus public safety. The next thing I remembered, I was here in this special hospital. At some point after I blacked out, the professor was beaten senseless, but survived. They've got me in here on that. I didn't see who did it. But the letters have stopped, for now.